who has won numerous awards and distinctions for journalistic excellence, and he's written a new novel. It's called Traveller, loosely based on his father's story, and an interesting one it is as well, because he found out about it later in life, the journey that his dad did go on. His father, Barney, was born in Tyrone and eventually ended up in Philadelphia, where John was born, and he didn't know everything about his dad's childhood, but hopefully he'll tell us more now, because John joins us on the line and on Zoom. John, it's good afternoon here. It's probably good morning there.
Well, I'll go with good afternoon.
Okay.
I'm a guest.
How are you doing?
Great.
Good. Right, let's start with the story of your father. I mean, your novel is loosely based on his story, and his is a fascinating one because he headed off on an unusual departure, not of his own choosing, to the United States.
Well, he actually embarked from Belfast to Montreal, and he was, as you said earlier, it's something I did not find out until actually about 4 years ago. He was part of what was known as the British Home Children Program. And it was a program that was sanctioned by the British government, the Catholic Church, and other religious organizations, as well as some secular organizations, to ship poor children from Great Britain, from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, to Canada, to Australia, to New Zealand, and South Africa as basically free labor.
Right.
And the children ranged anywhere from 9 to 14 years originally, but there were some who were shipped off much younger. Some say as young as 4 years old.
And what year did your dad leave for Canada?
My dad left at the end of July in 1929.
Right, at the age of?
He was 16.
Right. And a lot of the boys ended up, especially in Canada, ended up working in farms. Is that right?
Yes, that's true.
Right. As your dad did?
Yes, he actually. Well, it's really funny. I found out about his indenture quite by accident. I was doing research on family history in Ireland, and the records are very, very tough to mine. So I was able to trace the family back to about 1795, but very little background. A cousin of mine in Atlanta was working on her background, and she stumbled across the actual ship that my dad came over on, which I never knew. It was called the Mont Royal.
So you had a stumbling block, and then thanks to your cousin, you found the actual ship that your dad sailed on.
Exactly, but finding the ship was just the opening salvo. I also got a copy from her of the ship's manifest. It had my dad's name, but it also had the name of about 12 other Irish boys. And it fortunately said where they were bound. They were all bound for the same location. They were bound ultimately for a place called St. George's Home in Ottawa. Now, they were landing in Montreal, and they were all being greeted by the same nun, Sister Frances, Mother Frances. And so I had no idea what this was about. Why was he traveling in a group? Because I never knew that he had traveled in a group. I knew that he had emigrated alone at 16, but I thought it was a one-off. So I did some research into the St. George's Home in Ottawa, and I found out that it was the primary receiving home for the Irish Immigration Association. The Catholic Immigration Association. And when I did research into that, I found that it was the major receiving home for home children. I had never heard the term before. So I did a little bit of research into the home children and found out that it was this massive program of immigration. I then looked into St. George's, And I found a gentleman online who knew something about the Home Children program. So I contacted him, and he looked through his records in Canada, could find nothing on my father. And he said, however, there is an organization in Birmingham called let's see, it's the excuse me a second, I just got to check my notes here. Anyway, it's the Father Hudson's Care in Birmingham.
And they were able
So
to
I
give you
wrote
more.
to them, and I explained what this gentleman in Canada told me. I also included some background on my father, the ship he sailed, and so on. And I waited for a reply, thinking, well, maybe they've got it, maybe they don't. And I hit the jackpot. They said, yes, we actually have a small file on your father. And I said, great. And he said, well, there is a problem. It is going to cost £30. Right. And I said, that's no problem, trust me. So they sent me this packet of information, which I can't believe they found. It was the actual applications that my father's father, my grandfather, signed on his behalf. It included letters that he wrote to different organizations as a boy, saying, I'm a good boy, I work hard, and I could be part of this. And it was one thing after another, just building on this story. And the novel actually grew out of, as I did the research. I'm thinking, this is a good story. Having been a journalist and a writer for my entire career, I said, this could be a really good story. So I started to think about how could I incorporate my father's story into a novel, a piece of fiction. So I mined all of the information that I had gotten about the Home Children, all of the information I got about my father, and I decided to write the novel as an homage to my dad. And it's something that, if I can encourage anyone who's listening, please, please talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents, because once they're gone, they're not only gone, but their history is gone, their story is gone. And you're going to be left floundering, trying to find out what they did, who they were.
Because your dad never talked about this.
He never mentioned it. He never once mentioned that he was an indentured servant. And the reason I found out was this was a source of great shame for the children who came over, because so many of them were maltreated. They were called street Arabs. They were called gutter garbage. They were absolutely demeaned in the worst way. But even worse than that, sadly, a lot of them were maltreated by the people they were supposed to go to, the homes, the farms, and so on.
Yeah, they were supposed to be monitored, but often that fell down.
Yeah, it was a combination of neglect and a lack of resources. When you look at the entirety of Canada, it's such a huge place. And even the provinces of Quebec and Ontario, very large. And when you've got limited financial resources, it's difficult to go out and monitor children who are hundreds and sometimes 1,000 miles away. So unfortunately, sadly, a number of these children were simply forgotten to death.
Your dad eventually made it out of indenture and made his way to Philadelphia, married a woman from Newfoundland, your mum, and spent a life working in the mines and for Ford. Is that correct?
Well, actually, he did that before he emigrated.
Oh.
Once he was released from indenture, of course, he was free to go, but free to go in a country of strangers with no education. So what do you do? Dad eventually went to work on farms. He was a miner in central Ontario. And eventually he wound up in Toronto working for Ford. And he was once again, without an education, without training, he was what was known as a stock picker. and the stock picker was the guy in a warehouse who got an order and went to the shelves and picked the product off the shelf and delivered it to the front desk. So that's how he did that. He met my mother in Toronto, and they both emigrated to the United States in 1946.
Okay.
And his struggles were lifelong, sadly. I think part of it was because of this indenture. He was an alcoholic, unfortunately, until the day he died. He had poor health. He came down with tuberculosis just 3 years after he emigrated to the States. And at that time, the state would break up the home to protect the public. So Dad was sent off to a sanatorium for tuberculosis patients in one part of Pennsylvania. My mother was sent to another sanatorium. I was sent to a foster home, and my sister was put in an orphanage. And that was for 18 months. And they came back together about 1952, I think. They had nothing. They had zero. And my dad, bless his heart, he was a demon when it came to work. There were times when my dad had 4 part-time jobs at once. He was working 20 hours a day just to make life better. And ultimately, he was able to retire to Florida, living the American dream, as it were. But again, sadly, he only had 4 years, and then he died at the age of 69.
But he did make it back to Ireland on one occasion.
He did. In 1973, I decided I'm going to go. I've always heard about Ireland. I've just loved it from afar. And I went on my own and spent a month traveling through Great Britain, and I went from Stranraer to Larne on a ferry, and I landed amid the Troubles, which was an experience on its own.
I bet.
But I got to meet an aunt in London. I got to meet an aunt in Corby, which is a steel town north of London. And then I landed in Ireland, and it was, believe it or not, it was home. It was home from the moment I stepped on the shoreline, and I got to meet them. So I went back and I related the story of my trip, and Dad thought, well, good for you. Mm-hmm. The next year I got married, and my wife and I spent our honeymoon in Ireland. I went back again. Well, apparently that was one too much for Dad. He says, all right, I'll go. And he went back and he met all of his sisters. Sadly, by 1975, 75, both his mother and his father had died. His father died in 1957. His mother died in 1964. And I remember the day that he got news that his mother died. He was sitting on the edge of his bed and just crying his heart out. He never got to see her again, never got to see his dad again. But I guess after I went over, he finally decided to stop with the foolishness and go back. And I think you had seen the photo of Dad meeting his brother after 45 years at their farm, which Packy, his brother, still lived in.
Wow, that must have been amazing. Well, listen, you came on to chat about your book, and we've hardly mentioned it. The book is, and it's loosely based on your father's story and the story, a similar story of many others who travelled to the United States or to Canada, as was your dad's case, as well as children, really. And the book is called Traveller. Very briefly, it predates your dad's journey to Canada, doesn't it? The book?
Yes, it does. It starts on the farm. And fortunately, I've visited Ireland about a half dozen times. And every time I go, of course, I go to the farm. Sadly, the farm has passed out of the family. It passed out of the family in 1995. But it was still there, and I could still see it. And in fact, in 73 and 74, I actually went to the farm, visited with Packy, sat in the same room where Dad was raised, the same fireplace with the turf fire. It was just magical. So basically, the farm that I describe in the book is my dad's farm. Okay. It's exactly what it was.
Well, the book is out now, and I presume people can order it online.
Yes, they can order it on Amazon. They can search. It's available on of course Amazon.co.uk. But some people are having trouble getting the paperback. So if you want to order the paperback, you can do it through any EU country. For instance, Amazon.fr. Okay. And you can get it that way.
And it's simply called Traveller. John, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you and hearing your story and most importantly your dad's story. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me.
Around the Northwest, brought to you by Errigal Arts Festival, Donegal.